With the launch of the Haslab campaign, we finally got to see the official starter set for Heroscape Age of Annihilation, but it turns out it's missing something, and that's all that really cool terrain from the Age of Annihilation teaser trailer. Fortunately, with the magic of Blender and some sticks I got in my backyard, we can solve that problem. So this here is today's project, and the first step is to actually take some measurements in order to build these bases inside Blender. Now the reason I went with building these 3D printed terrain pieces instead of just taking existing tiles and gluing sticks to them is because I wanted to actually have these terrain pieces sit on the level of the battlefield and not be one level above them, or not force people into kind of sticking them in between existing tiles, and just therefore give you much more flexibility in how you want to use these pieces for your game. Of course, if you don't want to go through the process of building the 3D printed tiles, you can always use your own Heroscape tiles and glue sticks to them. That can work too. Now there are three measurements we need to take on this tile. The first is the corner to corner of one of the hex spaces. So something like that. Then you need to measure approximately what the total size of the tile would be. So you kind of just from corner to corner measure something that's a little bit bigger than the actual top of the hex tile. So this is going to be your maximum outer diameter of the tile. And then finally, you need to figure out approximately how tall these little nubs that sit in the top of the tile are. And in case you are wondering what those measurements are, I'll give them to you in just a moment when we get inside a Blender. Because it's important to note that when you're integrating 3D printed parts with an existing piece, keep in mind that 3D printers are kind of approximately accurate to within 1 millimeter. So you may need to do a little bit of experimentation, taking your measurements here, then maybe adding plus 1 millimeter or something like that to get the exact size correct. So there may be some trial and error with 3D printing a piece, testing out, and see how things fit. With our measurements done, we're going to jump into Blender to build this base. What we'll need to do is create 2 hexagons, and in Blender, a hexagon is nothing more than a 6 vertex cylinder. And I've done some trial and error here, and I figured out what the best measurement should be. So I'm going to start with an inner diameter of 44.7 millimeters. So let's do Shift A to add a new cylinder and set the number of vertices to 6. The radius should be half of our intended size, which is 44.7, so divide that by 2, we're at 22.35. For the depth, let's change this to 2.2. Now if you're new to Blender, you may notice that all these units are in meters. That's just kind of how Blender works. When you export this to your slicer program, it'll all be millimeters. Left click away from that piece, and now we're going to add a second hexagon that's going to be the size of the entire base. I calculated this out to be 47.8 millimeters, so once again divide that by 2 and set your radius to 23.9 millimeters. As for the depth, let's go a little bit over 3, maybe 3.2, 3.3, something like that. So what you see here now is the new hexagons covering up the old one. Press Z and then choose wireframe. Left click on the inside hexagon, and now we want to drop it down just a tiny bit. So how you do this is you press G, and then you're going to press Z, and this will lock the movement of this hexagon in the up and down direction, and you want to lower it just a bit so its base is a tiny bit below the other hexagon. Something like that right there. Now I want to give each of these pieces a unique name because that's going to matter here in just a moment. So select the hexagon, and then on the right you want to choose Object Properties, which is this kind of square with some bounding box corners around it. And then up at the top where it says cylinder, you want to change that to some sort of name that you know what it means. The exact name doesn't matter, it's purely a reference for yourself. Then repeat the process for the other hexagon. Now we're going to perform what's called a Boolean operation. This is a 3D math thing. And what we're going to do is take the larger hexagon and we're going to cut out the space of the smaller hexagon from it. So start by selecting the outside large hexagon. And we want to jump over to our modifiers properties, which is a little wrench on the right hand side. Choose add modifier, and then under the generated column, choose Boolean. Difference is selected, which is like a subtraction thing. And then for the object, you want to choose your inside hexagon. And this is why we gave them useful names, because now you can tell which object to use for certain operations like this. It can be a little tricky to tell if this works. It takes some experience. But what you're going to want to do is jump back to solid mode. So press Z and choose solid. Select your inside hexagon and press H to hide, and this will kind of make it go away for a little bit. And what you should see is something like this, where you can tell now that the hexagon's been cut out. If it looks good, select your outside hexagon. You want to jump back over to the modifiers on the right hand side of your window. There's a little arrow there next to a camera button, and under that you have the option for apply. And what we've got at this point is going to be the base hexagon you would use for any sort of single terrain piece thing. What you want to do at this point is export as an STL. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. 3D print it up and make sure it works all right on your terrain piece. If it works great, you can move on to the next step. If not, you may need to go back and do some size adjustments. So to export your little hex here as an STL file, you want to left click on it. It'll turn orange, as things do in Blender. Then you want to go to File, Export, and choose STL. When you are exporting these files from Blender as an STL file, there is an option called Selection Only. You'll usually find on the right-hand side of the export dialog box. You want to check that, otherwise you're going to export every object in your scene into the STL file, and that's usually not a good thing. From there, you can save it to your computer wherever you need it, bring it into your slicer, and just follow your normal 3D printing workflow from there. So let's say your hex is too big or too small after your test print. How do we solve that problem? Well, there's ways in Blender to do very precise adjustments and measurements, but that's a little bit beyond this tutorial. You can look up the Measure It plugin if you're interested in that kind of a thing. Let me show you some quick and dirty ways to kind of approximate that kind of a thing. On the right hand side of your Blender screen, you should see a bit of an interface with a lot of numbers and weird buttons. If you don't, press the letter N. That's N as in... There's probably a Heroscape character that begins with the letter N, but honestly I can't think of one right at the moment. Well, that's embarrassing. I forgot about Nilfine, my favorite character. Make sure you choose the item option, the sub-menu up at the top here. And what you want to look at is the section here called Scale, where you see X, Y, Z, and right now it should all be 1s. To make your hex a little bit bigger, you want to change the X and Y value to be a little bit above 1. To make it a little bit smaller, you want to go ahead and make it a little bit less than 1. I'm assuming you don't need to make any big changes, so in this case, maybe if you want to make it larger, make X and Y 1.05, smaller, do 0.95. Then press Ctrl A and choose Apply Scale. Now repeat the process with the exporting as the STL file, try it out, and fiddle with these numbers until you get something that works well for your terrain piece. Once you've got your tile size set correctly, I want to make it look a little bit more like it belongs in the Heroscape Battlefield by kind of adding that cracked ground look to it. So press Tab with your object selected. This will take you into Edit mode, and you want to choose Edge Select mode. In the upper left hand corner of the screen, you'll see 3 little buttons. There's one in the middle called Edge Select. Click that. And then you want to left click somewhere on the screen outside your object to deselect whatever may be selected with your object at the moment. Then by holding down Shift and the left mouse button, you want to select each of the 6 sides of the hexagon that make up the top face. Once you've got the entire top selected, you want to press Ctrl B, that's B as in Bob for bevel, and very slowly move the mouse cursor out. And what you're going to see is a bit of a slanted face where we had all those edges selected. Left click the mouse button when you're done, but only click it once. What's going to happen is in the lower left hand corner of the screen, there's a little box floating there that says Bevel. Click on that, and this will open up a screen with a whole bunch of options. Most of it doesn't really matter. What matters is the segments value. Change that to 3, and what it's going to do is instead of a single slanted face, it's going to get more of a rounded corner with 3 faces. Alright, press Tab to exit edit mode. Now we're going to play with sculpt mode. This gets a little dicey, but I'm going to give you a few options you want to press, and I'll show you exactly the way we're going to do this. In the upper left hand corner here, change object mode to sculpt mode. Choose the option now on the left side for clay strips. It should be about 3 or 4 from the top. We need to choose the active tool and workspace settings over here on the right. It looks like a screwdriver and like a wrench of some sort. Now there are lots of options here. I'm only going to have you change about 3 or 4 of them. For direction, make sure that is set to subtract. For radius, set that to 12. Strength, set that to 2, and make sure direction is subtract. Under advanced, be sure to check front faces only. And then a little bit further down, you want to turn on the option for Dyne Topo. That's dynamic topography. A warning may pop up. Don't worry about that. Just hit OK. And then finally, for detail side, once you've enabled Dyn Topo, change that to 5. Jump to your top view. To create this effect, we're going to do 2 movements at the same time. One's going to be moving your brush parallel to the edge of the hexagon, and then the other one's going to be moving the brush roughly towards the center of the hexagon. When you're closer to the edge, the movement that's going to be parallel to the edge of the hexagon, you want to make that more pronounced, and as you reach the center or closer to the center of the hexagon, you want to make it less pronounced. So you get something like that that kind of looks like those individual cracks you see on the Heroscape tile. You may want to go over each of these little grooves that you create twice, so repeat the process one more time. And now, keep doing that all around the tile until you get something that kind of looks like the Heroscape tiles. This is the type of process where you have some sort of pen input, whether it be like a Wacom tablet or a Microsoft Surface Pro. That type of thing works great for sculpting in Blender. Another design element you see of the Heroscape tiles is they just have some random lines cut in them. So feel free to add that too, just by hitting the mouse button and drawing a line across the surface of the tile. Pretty similar to what you've been doing now, but just no zigzag movements. We're going to return to object mode, and then we'll export this guy as an STL file and send it over to our 3D printers. See if you can do a little bit of experimentation with Blender, learn some new skills on your own, and try to make a 2-hex tile. With the 3D print done, and I like how it looks, we're going to work on finishing these pieces up. The first finishing step we have to do is for the single hex bases that are going to be used as trees, I want to drill a hole in the base that I can use to glue the stick into. For the diameter of the hole, you want to make it just a little bit smaller than the tree, and you'll see why in just a bit. Now for all of these parts, I'm going to take them and I'm going to hit them with a spray primer. I'm using brown spray primer from Army Painter's War Paint series, but it's kind of up to you whatever color you want to make these tiles. After the primer is dried, I'm applying several layers in terms of dry brushing, and I'm working with some various brown colors as well as some desert yellow, and I'm mixing in a little bit of white to brighten up the yellow a little bit. And then once all these layers of dry brushing have dried, and will take a little while, I'm taking my very fine detail brush, Artificer Layer Extra Small Brush from Games Workshop, and I'm applying some streaks of the light yellow and the brown to kind of make it look like there's a bit of a fallen over grass or wheat texture. I'm going with the whole drying out death type appearance for Age of Annihilation, or how I'd imagine it might be. All the painting done, it's time to glue things up. For the sticks that are laying on the ground, just glue them in place. That should be pretty straightforward. Feel free to pile them up too and kind of make them look a little bit more interesting. Oh, and by the way, these sticks come from a type of a dogwood tree. I find that the tips of their branches look like mini trees, and therefore they work really well for this project. When it comes to gluing the trees into single bases, like I mentioned a little bit ago, we wanted to drill the holes to be a little bit smaller diameter than the actual tree itself, because I'm going to take a hobby knife here and very carefully reduce the diameter of the stick such that I can insert it in the hole and glue it into place. And once that glue is dried, I want to flip the terrain piece over and take some sprue cutters, and I want to remove any part of the stick that is actually sticking through the 3D printed base. Therefore, this piece will go back to sitting nice and flat on the battlefield. And that's about all I got for you today. We took an easy Blender tutorial, mixed it in with some basic modeling for tabletop wargaming, and created something that more or less captures the feel of what we see in the Age of Annihilation teaser trailer, and you can use this as a starting point for creating your own more advanced custom Heroscape terrain. Just some quick thoughts on using them in the game. I would probably think this would just simply block movement as a tree, and then maybe these piles of sticks like this, they might work pretty well for essentially not allowing someone to stand in this space. So you can maybe jump over it if enough movement points, but it kind of just, you can't stay there, kind of a thing. But whatever you want to do with them, that's kind of up to you. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. If you want to see more Heroscape terrain projects, post that down in the comments. I was thinking I might be able to recreate the lava effect from the trailer. I think I know how I might do that with some Arduino development and some custom LEDs. So if you want to see that, I'm going to need to see some comments, because that might be a bit tricky. It might take a while. But Anyway, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you next time.